Hello and welcome to another episode of On the Stand with Hashi Sharon. Today we have Jerry Birnbach with us, a highly celebrated retail designer and expert with over 50 years of experience leading Fortune 500 companies to their biggest successes in retail design and structure. He counts Walmart, Target, and Macy's as clients and has now worked on more than 650 cases as a slip and fall expert witness, a retail injury expert witness, and commercial injury expert witness, offering his expertise to both plaintiffs and defendants. This episode is going to be a treasure trove for plaintiff and defense attorneys who work on slip and fall cases in retail and commercial spaces, as well as for professionals and expert witnesses who assist these attorneys on both sides of the bar. So, on that note, let's call on the stand Jerry Birnbach. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So, you have a vast background in architectural technology and retail design. So, let's start from the beginning and go back to your education. So, how did your stints at the New York Institute of Technology and the City College of New York shape your approach to store design and safety?
Well, that was a general introductory course that I took with 2 degrees in architecture. And it enabled me to have an understanding more about the structure of the store than the actual mechanics of what the economics are in retail. And it wasn't until my first position as director of store planning for a major retailer who had 60,000 square feet facilities that are located in the upper northeast of America and Louisiana, Puerto Rico. We, or I, addressed the various shopping center issues that were a result of that. But more importantly, I got to deal with merchandisers on a daily basis. And that was where I learned store planning because it's more than just laying out a store, it's understanding the merchandise capacity, the ability to make your figures. And that's what drove me throughout my career in terms of designing a store. There was a formula. Very often, the stores of the future that the magazines select
Mhm.
tend to be out of business within a year because they don't take in the economics. They look great, but they are not good when it comes to understanding the economics of retail.
And so my takeaway from here is that, like the best education always happens on the job. And your college degree lays the foundation, but once you are in the profession, once you are, like working on something day in and day out, you have more experiences. That's where the real education happens.
That is great. And the one thing you have to be careful of is not to be um, your teaching experience can't be just one sided. I expressed to you the retail side of the equation, but worked for 10 years on the vendor side. And you learn the politics of retailing, you understand how a buyer operates, and you understand how the supplier of product operates. And it's very important that the two of them get along and that there's an understanding of what each objective is. And that makes for a great marriage.
I completely agree. So, for every professional who goes on to become an expert witness, there's usually an origin story. So, how did Jerry Birnbach, the retail designer, become an expert witness?
Well, I have a feeling that it was by accident, like many others.
Uh-huh.
It happened to have been that I was soliciting and advertising my design services, and an attorney decided that based on my experience, I was capable to assist them in understanding a J.C. Penney case that occurred in New York, New Jersey, and I was called upon to visit with the attorney the location and make an evaluation of whether or not the retailer did everything they could do to enable a customer to have a safe and hazard free experience in shopping.
And what was it about that experience that, like led you to decide that, okay, this is something that I like and this is something that I want to do again as an expert witness?
Well, it was very familiar to me. I was buying those components for my own retail
Mhm.
chain at one time, and I understood that this is what makes up retail. And my job was to evaluate the consumer as well as the
Mhm.
retailer and provide an opinion as to where I think the deficiencies occurred.
When I look at your vast experience in your career, you were very busy as a retail designer, and then after becoming an expert, you again have had a illustrious career with so many cases. So how did you balance the profession and the consulting as an expert part?
Well, I should say fortunately, but that's a poor use of word. COVID had a lot to do with the way my business
Mhm.
evolved because retailers were afraid to open up new stores during the COVID period. And what occurred were that a lot of courts started to back up and close down, and all of a sudden, I was going from 20 to 30 to 40 cases a year to almost 100 cases because everything got stacked up. And that's really what drove me to want to do more expert witness work than
Mhm.
to do basic design. Design is a very difficult assignment because you had the customer understands their store from a product standpoint. I understand it not only from product, but I understand the economics of what drives a business. And if they can't create, it's a very simple formula. If they can't create enough product to generate enough dollars, then they can't pay for their electric and their lease commitment.
Mhm.
And as a result, many retailers will go out of business because they don't do this homework prior to entering into the lease. And that's where my expertise and experience has excelled because I can direct a client from the get go that they're just not going to reach their projected level because it's impossible.
So over the years, if you had to identify like one or two key trends that you have observed in retail safety and design, like how has things changed, and you had to know, like I know it can't be attributed to just one thing that has changed that has made the biggest difference, but if you had to pick a couple of trends that have changed in the industry, what would those be?
Well, the corporation does a much better job these days of covering the rear end, if I may use that term.
Mhm.
And that's accomplished through their new employee handbooks and what they've described to their new employees as the best methods to keep a store safe and hazard free. The big conflict occurs when the person at store level doesn't want to follow these particular requirements. And even though the retailer has been very clear as to their level of expectation, unfortunately, the worker, who at sometimes is working at minimum wage, doesn't really care or have that interest to want to protect the owner. And they're more interested as to when 5 o'clock will roll around, they can go home. And
Mhm.
that, to me, seems to be the biggest conflict that occurs
Yeah.
even back then and today. And that's a problem because the associates should be protecting the corporation.
Where do you think the solution is? Like what do you think needs to change to bring the associates and the corporation's interests more in alignment to each other?
The best methods to encourage a worker
Mhm.
stems from the store manager. And the method in which the store manager is compensated can no longer be all about productivity and how much dollars they
Yeah.
generate. And it has to be, um, and this is a ticklish kind of a subject, is certain retailers are self-insured and certain retailers use outside insurance companies. And it's almost as though the insurance company should get after the retailer to want to stress the overseeing of hazards and ensure that customers are safe. it seems as though the insurance companies rather negotiate this out at the end. And it's a double-edged sword because the retailer doesn't want to alienate the customer. They want this customer for life. And even though a customer had something to do with the incident, the end results usually occurs where that consumer is compensated. And obviously, if the injury is severe, they're going to get a different compensation than they would if it was just a scratch. I've dealt with cases where death was involved, and that's pretty
Yeah.
heavy duty. And
Yeah.
the retailer has to be wise when they
Mhm.
negotiate out the settlements.
You've also done cases on for the defense, though you've done more work on the plaintiff side for the injured people. So, do you see, like, in those cases where you decided to work for the defense, and you've mentioned on your LinkedIn profile that you always go for the side, you'll take a case based on the integrity of the side and if you believe in the side story. So, have you seen frivolous cases where people are trying to bring in a lawsuit for slip and fall and injury against a retailer just to make a quick buck?
That's a very good question. The answer is yes. There are
Hmm.
not many um, where I felt after taking on the assignment that and reading the depositions, which are very critical. Also, the video of the incident is very helpful
Right.
in making a determination, but sometimes the video is not made available, or you can't expect the retailer to be putting video in every aisle of every store.
Yeah.
So the retailer decides maybe where the higher stealing rate is and will put cameras in there to try to protect themselves.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that in evaluating these cases, the plaintiff is the one that has to make the case. The
Yeah.
the defense is not guilty until proven otherwise. So that's why I tend to have more plaintiff cases than defense,
Hmm.
because defense takes the position. I don't have to even talk or
Yeah.
offer a rebuttal to whatever the consumer, which is mostly who is issuing these lawsuits. um, I don't, as a defense, you don't have to protect yourself, but the plaintiff has to really make a case. So they have to show that the retailer was at fault. And the best way to show it, in my opinion, would be through the handbook, because the handbook is what the retailer states is their policy and their
Yeah.
methodology of running a store, and that they depend on the manager and the associates to follow these rules and regulations. And if they did, and inspection is one of the critical aspects of this regulation, if they've inspected properly and it's not just 3 times a day, because we know that especially in self-service types of operations, which
Yeah.
most retailers are these days, self-service encourages the consumer to want to do it themselves. And when
Yeah.
they're doing it themselves, they're exposing not only themselves but the retailer, and making sure that the method of accessing the product is safe and hazard free. So
Hmm.
the retailer has to protect themselves and make sure that everything in the store on an hourly basis is correct, because the consumer is handling these items ongoing. And the consumer has to evaluate, did the retailer do everything they're supposed to do? Chances are that it's not until discovery, which
Yeah.
includes the retailer giving up their handbook and their inspection regulations, that the plaintiff actually knows whether or not there is liability. They know they got hurt, but they don't know for sure that there's liability involved. And that's where I come in.
Mhm. No, I remember noticing a LinkedIn post that you had made last week, where I think you had noted that grocery stores have about 30 minutes to ensure safety.
Well, it depends on the retailer, and it's
Hmm.
constantly being challenged. The
Yeah.
typical time, whether it's a grocery. Now, grocery has much more water
Yeah.
involvement because they're trying to keep produce fresh and seafood. They tend to use water a lot more. And as a result, that is one of the key elements when you deal with slip and falls that occur.
Right.
The retailer has some grace period in which to discover it and make it hazard free. And
Yeah.
that's part of my evaluation, whether or not
Hmm.
enough time was placed on the
Yeah.
retailer. I try to be a non uh, sectarian in terms of producing liability until I really read what has transpired on both sides.
Hmm. And you've also been involved in the design of stores of the future. So let's ask for your insight into what you think the retail landscape will evolve in terms of safety and consumer experience in the next decade.
It's an interesting subject. A lot of people are actually trying to use robots to inspect floors, which is good and it's not good, because one of the problems with robots is the controlling of them as they go through a store. Um,
Mhm.
from a standpoint of, yes, they're seeing a lot more area. The question is, are they really seeing the area, or are they just trying to pass over an area? So you have to make that determination. Um, the other part of inspection would be the actual staff member and whether or not they're performing the inspection properly and timely. And those are being evaluated through the video, through deposition, depending on what the incident might have been. Just because someone spilled something 5 minutes prior to the person entering the area, unfortunately for that person, that falls within the grace period of the retailer, and the retailer is not liable. If it occurs, the spill, as an example, prior to the retailer discovering it, in the extent of an hour or two or three, then the retailer was negligent, and it would not be that difficult for associates within that department to be discovering some of these hazards. One of the problems occurs, and this is probably going to be an age old problem. To answer your question about is it something that's recent or is it going to be ongoing, the manager has to make a determination as far as payroll. Payroll plays a big part of the profitability of a store. And if more people mean more payroll, that's fine. Maybe, and I'm not even sure of this, whether or not the premium that you pay an insurance company is factored into productivity and considered when you evaluate should I have more people or not have more people. It seems to me that safety, and it's said in every handbook, is the first and foremost responsibility of every associate. But when you look at some of these videos and you see how neglectful the retailer was, it's very hard to understand why it's not being made a priority.
So let's segue into the section where we talk about your interaction and experience of working with attorneys, because they are a totally different breed than the retail industry. And you must have worked with hundreds of attorneys and law firms in your expert witness career. So, can you tell us about some of the interactions where you felt that, okay, the attorneys, these are some of the things that attorneys could do better when they work with expert witnesses?
Well, I've been pretty fortunate when it comes to attorneys. And if I was
Hmm.
to categorize attorneys, there are small firms who tend to be more dollar conscious than the larger firms. And the smaller firms have a tendency to take charge, to make sure that I'm reviewing everything that needs to be reviewed, and to negotiating my design fee to make sure that it meets their level of expectation in terms of what is in it for them if they win the case.
Hmm.
I have found that most attorneys are very knowledgeable, but when it comes to retail safety, they really lack the experience, and they are smart enough to call upon an expert to get involved. Now, some of that is chess playing because they know that if they come to a jury, uh, I have found that most of the time the plaintiff has me, a representative, as in terms of an expert, and the defense chooses not to bring an expert in. Maybe because they're trying to save money, or maybe they feel that their case is more open and shut, and they don't need to be defending too much. I don't have the answer to that. I just know that I do get involved with a lot of plaintiff attorneys who, fortunately for me, respect my opinion and aren't trying to sway me. Because in
Mhm.
deposition, one of the first questions will be, "Oh, you were approached by this attorney. Did the attorney explain to you the nature of this case?" Most attorneys, and when I say most, I mean almost 99% of the time, they don't try to influence me in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Some attorneys will tell you, their feelings about the case, but they, for the most part, do not try to sway me one way
Yeah.
or another, and they want to get my opinion in terms of,
Mhm.
well, do you think there's liability or not? And of course, they want me to say there's liability, but I'm not just going to say it to get another job.
Yeah.
If I say it, it's because based on what's being told to me,
Mhm.
and I feel it's neutrality, I will base my opinion on what lessons I have learned along the way. So
Yeah.
I try not to be swayed in the very beginning. Once I read the deposition, for the most part, it's exactly as the attorney had explained. X and X occurred. This is what my person did, and this is the end result. And then you make an evaluation based on the facts, not only from from the plaintiff's perspective, but you get a chance to hear what the defense has. Many times, unfortunately, the store manager who is not directly involved has no method to determine whether or not what their employee is telling them. The employee is too afraid to really tell the truth because it might show that they were negligent. So you have to sort through all of these leads and make a determination, where is the truth and where is a lie, and then provide an opinion.
Mhm. And coming to then the legal aspects of providing testimony as an expert witness. Now, obviously, you're not expected to be a master on the law. Your focus has to be what your area of expertise is. But having a basic understanding of the law around the expert witness issues like Federal Rule 702, the Dauber Trilogy, the disclosure rules in the state you are working on, they can make a little some difference. They can aid if the expert has a good understanding. So what is your take on that? Like, should experts be concerned about understanding the law, or they can just rely on the attorney to tell them and guide them?
That's a good question, and obviously you've spoken to a lot of experts.
Mhm.
The reality is, as you mentioned, there can be states where it's all or nothing. It's the
Yeah.
decision is going to award the recipient everything. There are there are states where they believe the recipient or the plaintiff had something to do with the case from a minimal standpoint or a maximum standpoint, and as a result, that particular state allows the jury to weigh those factors in and make a determination how much money will actually be rewarded to the plaintiff, depending on how much or how little that plaintiff had to do with the injury. And so, yes, you have to be aware of what state you're working in. It's interesting you bring up the state because my practice not only is state, but it is federal. And federal does
Yeah.
respond and react differently than states do. Uh,
Yeah.
for the most part, federal requires things to occur much faster. And as a result, the attorney really has to move quickly and make decisions, including, do I need an expert or don't I need an expert? And I've been given little to no time, which is they need an opinion. And typically, I would require 30 days because It's
Yeah.
not so much that it takes me 30 days, but I've already scheduled several cases already, and I'm not going to reschedule them.
Yeah. So usually, how do you manage this workload? Like, do you use a practice management software? Do you have your own system where you organize your cases, your like the whole calendaring, the scheduling? Like, how do you go about managing this workload?
Well, as you mentioned, it is a lot to manage. I've
Yeah.
actually have 5 people who
Hmm.
work for me. Now, I don't take them on as employees. They're all 1099 independent workers. Some of them help me with the research because I am smart, but I'll be the first to admit I don't know everything. And
Hmm.
their review of the condition that I'm dealing with helps me determine and make an opinion because that I am capable of producing once I have all the facts. So I have fact collectors. I have people who handle the administrative piece of the equation, such as set up appointments or when I'm going to do inspection. And then I have bookkeeper who actually handles the receivables and the payables and uh, I'm at a level now. I didn't need all these people when I first started out, but based on my workload, it's essential. In terms of software, the answer is absolutely yes. I use
Hmm.
my case because I find it's friendly to my application, even though a lot of the law software is law driven
Yeah.
and it's attorney driven, and it has a
Hmm.
tendency to provide information such as dates of depositions or that type of thing that I don't really find useful. And
Yeah.
as a result, I tried to modify the software, but I do use a software program just to manage because at any given time I've got 20 active cases and it's
Yeah.
impossible to remember all of the facts pertaining to these cases, and they're vital in your final opinions because if you screw it up in your report, the deposition is going to find out. And in deposition, you're really challenged for 3+ hours of
Yeah.
brutal questioning. And some attorneys are better than others in terms of how they provide and answer the question. But it's very demanding, and you have to be very aware of the case. And you couldn't
Mhm.
be aware if you didn't have the software.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the whole organization part, and I really think that more and more experts should look towards taking advantage of technology to manage their practice. That way, they'll be more efficient, and they can also be, like more valuable to the attorney who's working with them. Let's talk about some red flags. Like you said, you've been very fortunate that you've worked with nice attorneys who are focused, driven, professional. But have you come across an attorney who came to you with a case and something went off in your head, like, okay, no, this doesn't look right, and you said no to that case?
The answer is absolutely. I'm going to qualify anyone who calls
Hmm.
me and make a
Yeah.
determination based on their explanation in terms of what's going to happen.
Hmm.
It does occur that there is a lot of overlap and duplication of types of cases. A slip and fall is a slip and fall in a retail
Yeah.
environment. It may not be in commercial, and I do commercial work. Um, there, when there's overlap and I've qualified the attorney, I believe that I could take on the case. Sometimes it becomes an issue of economics.
Hmm.
Over the years, I've tried to hold my pricing for a 2 year basis and then increase it depending on the inflation rate, et cetera. And as a result, I do not care to go back to a lower rate just because someone said they can't afford me. I do feel bad. I'd like to offer my opinion, but I'm trying to run a business. I have 5 people who are depending on my ability to keep it going. So I have to make a decision that even though I'm emotionally, I might want to take on the case, I try
Yeah.
not to take on the case. So I had to make that decision. But for the most part, the attorney understands my value,
Yeah.
and I understand that they're not going to pay ridiculous numbers. I find that there are reports that are provided that show what average uh, experts earn a given year, and I try to stay
Mhm.
within that average. I don't try to exceed it. I do have a different level for basic report versus deposition versus trial. Trials, you can never predict the amount of time you're involved. Uh, the depositions are much more predictable. They're going to start at this time. I have to assume that it's going to be 3 hours, then some, because they'll spend the first hour just going over education. So it's come down to a basic formula, and I'm okay with the rates and the time that I need to spend depending on the rate.
Okay. So, knowing what you know today as a seasoned expert with so many years of experience and so many cases under your belt, what advice would you give to a new expert who's just starting out, or probably to yourself if you could go back in time 20 years ago?
Well, the reality is that I do have younger people who are interested in becoming experts. And what I tell them is I don't expect them to have the qualifications from an education standpoint because it's difficult at this point in juncture for them to go back to school, even though there is a lot of online training now.
Yeah.
But there's a certain level of education that would be nice for them to have some sort of a bachelor degree.
Mhm.
Associate degree is good, but it's not great. Um, and I'm looking more about what is going to be picked apart at deposition as opposed to your quality. Now, the attorney is equally aware of what goes on at trials and knows that the better qualified individual is going to stand up better in court than an individual who doesn't have that type of experience. I happen to be fortunate. I directed myself very early in life that I was going to stay in retail, remain in retail, and die in retail. And then as a result, I'm the retail expert.
Yeah.
And because I've got a very good profile looking backward in terms of what I do, and it's important to keep it up. And I recommend to anyone who's starting out that they need to have a certain level of expertise in an area, and it's whether or not it's on the line or on the job training, or they've read a lot, or whatever the case may be. That's a good place to start. I do recommend that as time goes on, you try to improve what your background is, because I don't believe that you should just stand on your laurels. There are new ways to get educated, and they're anywhere from online schools to actually seminars that are provided. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve yourself. And the more that you improve yourself, the more value I think you have to an attorney as far as an expertise. And there have been times where I've been stuck, but I look hard at the case and understand what is the attorney really looking for, and I'm able to provide an opinion based on that.
So, clearly, educational background is important. What you know about your craft and how you keep improving your credentials, that's important. How important do you think are soft skills and other, like that's not to do with your knowledge and your credentials, but how you deal with people and like any other skills that have helped you in maintaining and growing your practice?
Well, I guess, again, fortunately enough,
Mhm.
my background has been more from the vendor side than it was from the retail side. And as a result, you play a different type of negotiation and game. As an example, I've played tennis with Sam Walton. I had him as a
Mhm.
partner. There isn't anyone more successful than Sam Walton in Walmart when it comes to retail. But as a
Mhm.
vendor, I value the fact that I'm playing tennis alongside of Sam Walton. But when Sam Walton's on the other side of the net, the ball that I should have put right into between his teeth is still waiting to land, because you just don't want to to hurt them or to give them a bad taste of who you are.
Mhm.
So you play vendor ball, and there's nothing wrong with that. As a vendor, there's a certain amount of neutrality that you want to have. You appreciate the opportunity to be selling product in that retailer store, but you do want to make sure that you're not involved with lawsuits because the retailer is not keeping your product line up to date. Now, fortunately, we had representatives, just as a Coca Cola or a Pepsi Cola has, going into the store almost on a daily basis and making sure the department is neat and clean, hazard free. And they're doing what the retailer should be doing, but many times the retailer is too busy trying to take care of their own issues. So the vendor is very important. And that's something that I learned early in life, and understood that sure, you can hold the retailer responsible, but the reality is that the vendor who's maintaining a department is equally as responsible to keep that department clean and neat. Now, the bottom line as an expert is the retailer is always the one that's responsible. They need to figure out a way, whether it's more people or making it known in training, that yes, the vendor comes in, the vendor is responsible, but guess what? You're just as equally as responsible as the vendor. So get yourself over to that area and look at it, make sure that it's what it's supposed to be. And if it's not, you take care of it right then and there, and you let the vendor know that these things shouldn't be occurring. And that's very important in retail. Retail is you can't keep your eyes closed in retail, and there's no pointing fingers because it all comes back to the retailer.
That's great. So I don't know if you get any free time from all the cases you work on, but what do you like to do in your free time?
Well, free time has changed. I used to love to
Uh-huh.
ski, which is a
Oh, wow.
Northeast phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I like fishing. I like outdoor type of activities. I was a good baseball player. I went to a fantasy camp with the Yankees because I do stem from the Bronx, New York, and
Mm-hmm.
I will always be a Yankee fan. Sometimes that's difficult when you're traveling to Boston because they don't respect Yankee fans, but I understand that we don't respect Boston fans. So it's a mutual admiration.
Yeah.
Um, but I tend to be more an outdoor person. But
Mm-hmm.
now, later in life, um, I'm not water skiing. I'm not skiing. My activities are more about conversation and sitting and
Mm-hmm.
enjoying what's around me.
And do you spend like do you like reading? Do you like to write?
Well, um, reading is important. I
Mhm.
tend to differ from my wife, who I've been married to for 55 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a long time. Um, I read more technical than I would read fiction,
Okay.
because that's who I am. And
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm breaking in and trying to turn some of the business matters over to my siblings, or my I should say siblings, my children. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it, there's a certain part of me that wants to hang on, and a certain part that wants to let go, and I prefer to let go, and hopefully they'll move in a better direction because I'm old fashioned. Um, I'm smart enough to see new technology and new ways to go, but I'm not as smart as they are when it comes to what's really new and where is this all going. And I would tend to believe with AI and some of those uh, features that are there now and only improve as time goes on, that they're going to be more qualified to utilize them to their benefit and drive the business. So I believe that I accept what is, but smart enough to know that what will be is not up to me; it's up to them.
Mm-hmm. So, if attorneys and other experts want to reach out to you with questions or if they want to work with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, my website is much better. It's been
Mm-hmm.
part of me for 10 years, but fortunately, my son improved it. And my daughter, who is administrative right now, who comes out of a TV network, training. Between the two of them, they are helping me move the business along. And part of that is most definitely the website. Part of the reason why I've worked in 48 of the 50 states, and that includes Hawaii and Alaska. I'm missing Montana and Idaho. So if you're
Hopefully
listening,
this year.
I give them new new discounts because I want to get those states.
Yeah.
Okay, but regardless, when I'm priced right and I'm highly visible, I'm on page one of any Google search, and that's where I hope to be.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for your time today. This was everything I hoped it would be. I personally got to learn a lot about retail and expert witnessing, and I'm pretty sure this, like our listeners, would be experts and attorneys both. They would appreciate the knowledge and wisdom that you have shared today.
I appreciate it. And the last question, I don't know if I answered it completely, is I can be reached at Jerry, Jerry, Birnbach, Birnbach, at gmail.com. And there is a website with that name, LLC, comes after the name Jerry Birnbach.
So we'll put the website and the email address both in the show notes of the podcast, so users will be able to find you. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope to talk to you soon again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.